I've talked a lot about mecha anime on this channel so far. In fact, I think it's fair to say that it's sort of my main focus. You can thank the Gundam series for that, but when starting to branch out into other series, I've really found some stuff that I love. Patlabor was a fun and interesting OVA, and Escaflowne was a beautifully animated fantasy romp with Star Wars overtones. But the largest series that I have had people ask for by far is Macross. While I've been interested in the Macross saga for a long while, I was hesitant to cover it at first on the channel. I guess it seemed a little daunting, what with its weird licensing situations and passionate fanbase. But hey, I've watched like a third of Gundam now, and honestly I think I've found my footing as far as this sort of video goes. So hey, here we go with Super Dimension Fortress Macross. Just to be 100% clear, this video is covering Macross in its original form, the 36-episode anime originally created by Shoji Kawamori. While the Frankenstein's monster, that is Robotech, is a very interesting entry into the mecha landscape in its own right, I wanted to take a look at the original source material first. That being said, I know almost zero about Robotech, so this video should be devoid of any bias from having seen its derivative sister works. Macross itself was created by Studio New and Artland Studios in 1982, and would go on to wow audiences with its high-flying mecha action, compelling love triangle subplot, and an OST that is full of incredibly catchy Japanese pop music. Well, Macross has kind of flown under the radar unless you're already initiated in 80s mecha anime. While Robotech would help bring anime to the United States in 1985 by using footage obtained from Macross, Super Dimension Cavalry Southern Cross, and Genesis Climber Mospita, the company that created it, Harmony Gold, would go on to be a huge pain in the ass when it came to distribution of the original Macross works outside of Japan. Like I said, this is not a Robotech video, but we can leave it at Harmony Gold severely hampering the West's access to Macross media. So because of that, I'm pretty unfamiliar with Macross as a whole. I mean, I've seen the Valkyrie, and it's a cool design, and I've heard the name Roy Fokker, but other than that, I'm going in pretty much completely blind. So with the intro out of the way, let's take a look at Super Dimension Fortress Macross. Macross begins by setting the scene. It's 1999 and a huge derelict alien spacecraft crash lands onto the Earth, coming to a rest on South Eteria Island in the Pacific Ocean. The ship is absolutely enormous, and its impact with the Earth causes major ecological disasters, including a huge dust storm that blocked out most of the planet's sunlight. So just not a good time in general. The United Nations immediately secures the alien ship and cuts off all contact to the island. They classify the existence of alien technology as top secret and begin developing advanced weapons using this over-technology. Conflicts start erupting in the Middle East, and the UN proposes a world government, partly to prepare for a possible interplanetary conflict. Of course, not everyone is willing to give up their sovereignty, and the unification wars begin, lasting almost 10 long years. The alien ship has been rebuilt by the United Nations and has been christened the SDF-1 Macross, a huge interstellar battleship and flagship of the new UN world government. This thing is a pretty big deal, and today marks the day that it is supposed to take off, leaving the city that is sprung up around it. The entire city is in a festive mood as there is a celebration and even a demonstration of the military's new fighter jets, the VF-1 Valkyrie. Without even going any further, let me say I absolutely love the design of the Valkyrie. Artists in the 80s really knew how to make fighter jets cool, especially when you get really neat versions like the Roy Fokker Custom. Because just like Crossbone Gundam, any mech or vehicle with a skull and crossbones on it or a pirate-like theme is fucking awesome. Not to mention the beautiful black and gold color scheme. Artists over the years have done some absolutely breathtaking renditions of these vehicles, and those color schemes really make the designs pop. Our main character, Hikaru Ichijo, shows up in his super rad racer plane, interrupting the air show, which seems like a good way to get blown up, but it's okay because not only is Hikaru a skilled amateur pilot, he's also friends with Major Roy Fokker. Roy used to work for Hikaru's father as a stunt pilot before becoming an ace fighter pilot during the Unification Wars. I really like the relationship that Hikaru and Roy have in Macross. Roy is much like an older brother to our main character. He pokes fun at him and looks out for his best interests in equal measure. In return, Hikaru looks up to Roy and respects him, even though he doesn't quite agree with Roy joining the military to become a fighter pilot. That's right, Hikaru is a reluctant protagonist, or at least he starts out as one. He doesn't have much love for the military or a soldier's life, and he's confused as to why Roy would even join, and when he asks, Roy is just kind of a Chad, so he says it's for the women. Roy shows Hikaru one of the new Valkyries, and while he's impressed with its specs, he still doesn't see the value in joining the military as a pilot. In orbit, a huge alien ship arrives and sets its sight on the Earth, looking to locate the ship that crashed there 10 years ago. I gotta say, I love these guys. Known as the Zentradi, these aliens are pretty human-like, though sometimes they have weird mechanical parts on their bodies, or very unfashionable hair like our main antagonists, Lord Bertai and Archivist X-Doll, respectively. The aliens have varied skin and hair colors, but the weirdest thing about them is there's this weird reverb filter over their dialogue, and in some scenes it's super heavy and it almost starts to give me a headache. I got used to it after a while, but hey, it does go a long way to make them feel like otherworldly beings. Bertai dispatches a recon ship towards the Earth to check out the site of the downed ship. On Earth, Brigadier General Bruno Global, who has been named captain of the Macross, is called away just as he is about to give a speech. The Macross begins to power up its main guns once it's activated and fires autonomously, blowing up the alien recon ship in the atmosphere. The Zentradi respond to that with force, attacking the island, and unfortunately for Hikaru, there's no way to escape the bombardment except for taking off in the Valkyrie. He goes for a crazy ride through the sky before having to initiate a landing sequence, but unlike a normal plane, it is revealed that the Valkyrie is actually a fully transformable mech suit, and Hikaru changes into its humanoid shape to land. As a first look at the mecha in Macross, the Valkyrie is a really solid design. There's a really good idea showing the orange one off first, because that color scheme really helps the plane parts stand out when it's in its transformed modes. While it isn't as refined of a design as something that you'd see in like Zeta Gundam, which would come out a few years later, it has enough detail to avoid the smooth and blocky designs of earlier robot shows. In short, the Valkyrie design is simple, but it works well, and being able to see all the pieces in the different modes makes it memorable. On the other hand, the Zentradi start out using these battle pods, which remind me of Gundam's balls. That's a sentence. Or the sand pods from DBZ. I'm sure some of the inspiration for their design lies with War of the Worlds, but to me it's just sort of a boring design. Later on there are some custom ones and recolors that stand out a bit more, but I really prefer these Zentradi's later mech designs to these simple walkers. Global is ordered to take off with the Macross by UNHQ, and the ship does attempt to take off. However, the gravity control mechanisms just rip right out of the ship's hull, causing the Macross to settle back down to the ground. Guess that alien technology wasn't fully calibrated right. With the ship a sitting duck without the ability to lift off, Zentradi ground forces move in to try and capture it. Hikaru, surprised by the transforming functionality of the Valkyrie, accidentally crushes the side of a girl's house. And this is where Hikaru meets Lin Minmei, a flighty, slightly aloof girl that he ends up saving during the chaos of the Zentradi attack. With a little advice from Roy, Hikaru is able to grasp the controls of the transforming mech, and we get this really great sequence where Hikaru pulls Minmei into the plane while they're falling through the air. It's framed as this spinning unbroken shot that looks incredibly impressive even today. Hikaru has no problem pulling the trigger on the enemy walkers and easily blows one away in the city, but then the hatch on the alien mech opens up and out steps a giant alien that stands at an equal height with the Valkyrie. Hikaru is totally stunned and is ultimately saved by Roy's quick trigger finger. But I can't really blame Hikaru here. Like I said, I went into the Macross universe basically knowing nothing about it. So going in cold, this was a wow moment for me. I think it was a really cool idea to have the Zentradi be these giants. And the way it's revealed is cool too, because so far there's been no indication that these Zentradi are any larger than humans. It's just a part of the story that I really value not having been spoiled on. I'm glad I had the opportunity to be surprised by that twist. Roy takes the cockpit of Hikaru's Valkyrie, and with both Hikaru and Min-Mei inside, he returns to the Macross. Roy is an amazing senpai and even saves Hikaru's plane, but it isn't long before he's called away and leaves the two alone in the bowels of the ship. Oh yeah, the Macross is now successfully in space, by the way. It has a traditional propulsion system along with the gravity engines, so go human ingenuity, I guess. The support vessels that arrive in orbit to assist the Macross are easily dispatched by the Zentradi fleet, and Captain Global decides that the only way for the Macross to survive the attack is to use the untested spacefold system that will let them jump to a destination far from the Earth, hopefully pulling the aliens' attention away from the planet. Global orders the Macross to descend back to Eteria Island, and then it's here that the ship activates the fold system, disappearing in a huge ball of light. The ship reappears on the far side of Pluto, and we find that not only did the fold system transport the Macross, it also snatched up the ruins of the city as well. The ship takes on refugees from the city's shelters, about 56,000 civilians in all. And here's where the scale of the Macross really sets in. I mean, this ship is enormous. Along with the ruins of the city, an aircraft carrier named the Prometheus and a submarine named the Daedalus were both also transported and simultaneously recovered by the Macross. One thing about this show is that it is definitely not a hardline sci-fi. There are things that happen in it that you just have to accept and move on from, or you just won't be able to enjoy the show. For instance, the civilians aboard the Macross rebuild their entire city, complete with running water, electricity, and eventually whole-ass TV networks, and you just sort of have to run with it. For another example, the Daedalus and Prometheus are attached to the Macross's arms, and I don't think that's ever explained how. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. The show exists in its own internal logic, and I just thought I would point that out in case some of the later events sound like they make no sense. Hikaru and Min-Mei, who had tried to leave the Macross at the time of the spacefold, make it back inside the ship in Hikaru's racer. They spend a long time just trying to survive on the huge ship, as they have no idea how to make it to the bridge or really anywhere recognizable. Hikaru spends time searching the corridors and making maps, and they even go so far as to break open a pipe for a source of water. Good thing that wasn't sewage or a coolant pipe, I guess. Eventually things get too bad for Min-Mei to handle, and she laments the fact that she never even got to wear a wedding dress before she died. Her and Hikaru have a mock wedding, and just as they give up hope of being rescued, the ceiling caves in, and they're rescued by the mayor of the town from South Eteria Island. I really enjoyed this episode. Just watching the two explore the ship and then surviving is very interesting, and it also reinforces just how huge the Macross is. This is where Hikaru's infatuation with Min-Mei begins in earnest, and let me tell you, it persists throughout basically the whole show. My guy has a thing for shared trauma, I guess, because his infatuation with Min-Mei borders on obsession at times. Hikaru is pretty entertaining as a protagonist, but wow, he really is the oblivious male protag that just can't take a hint. Min-Mei, on the other hand, is flighty and sort of airheaded. I mean, there's points later on where she just sort of forgets that Hikaru exists for like vast amounts of time. No matter your opinion on Min-Mei or her part in the story, damn, Hikaru needed to get on Macross Tinder or something. I mean, goddamn. The citizens of the new city inside the Macross really come together and rebuild the town into something recognizable. Min-Mei even convinces her aunt and uncle to reopen the Nian Yan Chinese restaurant, which raises the spirits of the townspeople and soldiers. The peace is short-lived, however, because the Macross comes under attack by the Zentradi fleet, who have decided to leave the Earth alone and chase the ship. Captain Global orders the ship to transform into its humanoid form because it's the only way that they can currently fire the ship's main gun. When the Macross jumped through space using the fold system, the system just disappeared, so now they have to slowly limp home. The ship transforms and drives the attacking aliens off, but at the cost of the citizens' peaceful lives. When the Macross transforms, the city is ripped apart, and this happens pretty frequently in the show. I assume that they eventually come up with a way to build the city to avoid it being damaged whenever the Macross has to transform. But if that's so, they don't show us that. They do show us that cars and shit just fly all over the place during a transformation, even late into the series. So that sucks, unless you work for an insurance agency, I guess. Hikaru does join the military after Roy tells him that fighting to protect those that you love is pretty cool, and 2 months pass as we see his training, and eventual assignment to a Valkyrie squadron with some other recruits. Usually when combat breaks out in Macross, at least in this opening arc, it involves a lot of fighter craft all battling each other. But one thing I really like about this show is that the ship itself gets involved in battle most of the time as well. The Zentradi are reluctant to outright destroy the ship for reasons that the humans are oblivious to, so they're usually throwing waves of soldiers at the Macross to try and weaken its defenses. The crew comes up with a defense system called pinpoint barriers that can be manually controlled and can block missiles, and they have some other neat tricks too, like the Daedalus attack where the ship punches through an enemy craft with its giant aircraft carrier arm. The Macross has made it back to Mars by this point, and the Zentradi are starting to get restless. Bertai enlists the help of a new alien antagonist known as Kamjin the Ally Killer, who is known for being reckless on the battlefield, but also very effective. Kamjin sticks around for the entirety of Macross, and despite looking like an early Dragon Ball villain, he really adds a sense of chaos to the main Macross story. He goes and plants gravity mines around an abandoned Mars base, and of course the Macross takes the bait and goes to investigate the distress signal. First mate Misa Hayase volunteers to go to the Mars base to check out the signal, saying that the base would be a good source of supplies for the Macross. This episode really highlights Misa, who has a rather abrasive relationship with our main boy Hikaru this far, mostly from his lack of respect for her military authority over comms, and usually calling her an old lady. Before the Unification Wars, Misa had a boyfriend named Ryber that went to work on the Mars base, but because the Earth was cut off from space during the war, she never heard from him again. Of course, the Macross gets trapped in Kamjin's gravity mines, and Misa blows the base's nuclear reactor to destroy them. She does this and then resigns herself to dying there with the memory of Ryber, before being saved by Hikaru. Due to his bravery in this mission, Hikaru is awarded a medal and promoted, being given command of 2 new wingmen, Hayao Kakizaki and Max Genius. Kakizaki is a loud-mouthed, barrel-chested guy who sorta looks like frat boy Vegeta, but at least he's well-meaning. Max, on the other hand, is basically just an ace pilot almost immediately, getting 7 kills in his first sortie. I mean, his name is Max Genius, it's not exactly subtle. The town holds a beauty pageant known as the Miss Macross contest, and of course Min-Mei wins the entire thing, swiping the prize away from a more experienced woman. Hikaru wanted to attend the pageant, but of course he's a soldier, so he's pulled away when a Zentradi recon plane is picked up on the Macross's radar. The crew inside happen to be intercepting the Miss Macross contest, and here is where we learn that the giant warrior aliens have no concept of what love is, or really any sort of culture at all. They exist only to fight wars, so when they start watching the pageant and they start feeling feelings down there in their chest, you sickos, they think it's some sort of human super weapon. The Macross comes under attack from Kamjin's forces and sustains damage to their radar. The damage is repairable, but it will take 10 hours, so Misa has the idea to pilot a cat's eye recon craft in order to give them some eyes. Unfortunately for her, she runs into an asteroid and is captured by a Zentradi ship, but Hikaru's Vermilion team is hot on their trail, breaking into the ship to try and save her. We get to see how crazy strong the Zentradi are, as Britai just beats the shit out of Vermilion Team's Valkyries with his bare hands. He even gets thrown outside and survives full vacuum at one point. Dude's just built different. Hikaru, Misa, and Kakizaki are captured, with Max escaping and wandering around the ship in his Valkyrie. The ship folds and arrives at the main Bodal fleet, led by Lord Bulldoza. The prisoners are brought before the group of alien leaders, and Misa and Hikaru are ordered to kiss each other. And I have to say, if a giant alien ordered me to kiss someone, I think I'd shit my pants. The aliens all freak out and call the humans something known as proto-culture. Proto-culture is kept a small secret for the start of the series, but the Zentradi refer to it almost like some sort of virus or infection, saying that all those who come into contact with it lose their will to fight. Bulldoza explains that their ancestors were myclones, like humans, and also had culture, but all of that has been lost to time. Bulldoza comes up with the idea to send spies to the Macross to determine if the humans truly are proto-culture, and we learn that the Zentradi have the ability to turn themselves into myclones through the use of a big machine filled with green goo. The 3 aliens from the recon craft are chosen to become spies. Max saves the prisoners, and they're able to steal a Zentradi battle pod while the ship jumps back to the Macross's location. While floating through space in the middle of a battle, our main crew hears a song over the radio. While they were away, Minmay fulfilled one of her dreams of recording a song, and this is where the Minmay Idol side story officially kicks off. And it's really more than just a side story because, as we'll soon see, the latter half of Macross leans heavily into soap opera territory, but not exactly in a bad way. The 3 myclone spies sneak aboard the Macross and have a hard time adjusting to life. Talk about culture shock. Minmay comes out and gives the newly returned crew some bouquets and then sings her song again. Let me tell you, if you're not totally into this song, buckle up for a bumpy ride. I'll give Minmay's music props, it definitely is catchy, but I can only listen to "Choo Choo, my boyfriend is a pilot" so many times before I want to fucking myclone my own eardrums. To the show's credit, there are a bunch more songs that pop up later, and they're all catchy, with a couple later on that I would actually say are great and go along really well with the mood of the show. But for a while, this one is all they got. The Macross busts its way through the Zentradi blockade and finally makes it back to Earth after a long 8 months in space. Misa and Global meet with the UN HQ and give their report on the Zentradi, but due to Misa dropping the camera containing the recordings that she made of Bulldoza talking about proto-culture, the UN Council don't really believe them. Despite Global heavily suggesting that the aliens and humans may have a common ancestor, the UN decide that peace negotiations are currently off the table, and they order the Macross to go back to space to distract the alien fleet and buy Earth more time to muster a response. The kicker here is that all of the people on South Eteria Island that ended up on the Macross were pronounced dead to cover up the existence of the aliens and their technology, so the UN won't let any of them disembark from the huge ship. The civilians on the ship don't really take kindly to this news and try to fight Hikaru and his squad mates in the Chinese restaurant, only to be thwarted by the kung fu moves of the newly arrived Lin Kaifun. Kaifun is probably my least favorite character on the show. He's an anti-war activist, I guess. I mean, his activism is pretty much just shouting, "Military bad!" anytime anything happens. And this is to an extreme point too. Later on, he's captured, and after he's rescued by Hikaru, all he does is comment on how violent the rescue plan was. Like, shut up. The point is, I hate Kaifun. He's aloof and weird, and I haven't even mentioned that he's a love interest for Minmay, completing this show's Devil's Triangle. And yes, he's Minmay's love interest despite being her first cousin. They share a surname, and it's really fucking weird. Luckily, the show knows that Kaifun is a weird, abusive dick, and eventually turns him into a lonely alcoholic with no friends. Hikaru is injured in a battle with Kamjin's forces, and we're treated to an entire episode that is half recap of the series events up until now, and a half crazy, weird fever dream. The story is retold out of order, and there's a lot of fantastical imagery. Hikaru should realize that Minmay is not really interested in him at this point, as she doesn't even know he's in the hospital and only comes by once Roy asks her to personally. Speaking of Roy, he's shown in a relationship with Claudia, and I have to say it's a pretty cool piece of the show's background. And on top of that, for 1982, it's pretty progressive to have an interracial relationship in an anime front and center. I'm sure there are tons more shows that did something similar that you can let me know about, but this just really reminded me of a show like Gundam that set out to push boundaries in the portrayal of its characters. A Zentradi ace pilot named Milia is talking to the current replacement for Bertai, Lap Lamaz. She's told that the Macross has an ace pilot of its own and goes out to find and face them in combat. While the viewer knows that this is probably referring to Roy Fokker, the one Milia tangles with is Max, who is an ace in his own right. It's here that the show shakes things up with a bit of tragedy as Roy takes fire from an enemy fighter during the battle. He goes to Claudia to fulfill his promise of trying her very appetizing pineapple salad, only to collapse and bleed out from his wounds. The death of a main character like Roy, who is like an older brother to Hikaru, really changes the dynamic of the show. Hikaru is a good pilot, but with Roy around, the show always felt sort of safe. Like, if there's something that Hikaru and his Vermilion team can't handle, well, Roy can probably come and take care of it, even if the show itself uses Roy very sparingly. Once he's gone, there's no one above Hikaru who's coming to save him. If he and his team can't get something done, that's it. It's a spike in dramatic tension that rekindles the fire under Macross's ass a little over halfway through the series, and it's a very good piece of writing. Luckily for the Macross, the autonomous government of Ontario is willing to take in the 50k civilians aboard the ship. Unluckily for the Macross, Camjun decides to attack the Macross once again, and in a gamble to test their new full-cover shield, the ship wipes out an entire city's worth of people when the shield gives out and explodes. Milia is made a Myclone spy and makes it aboard the Macross to hunt down the ace that eluded her in battle, and Canada decides not to take in the civilians after the incident with the Macross's shield explosion. Which is kind of a dick move, Canada, come on. Oh yeah, I forgot that frat boy Vegeta Kakizaki explodes here, and Hikaru has to write a letter to his family about it. War sucks, man. The Macross is put directly in the way of the Zentradi fleet, helmed by a newly returned Bertai. The three Zentradi spies return to the fleet and give their report, talking about how men and women live together and do a bunch of weird stuff like kiss. The spies lament the fact that they have to return home, and they even smuggled back some things like a small TV and a Minmay doll that dances and sings. The aliens intercept a transmission, and it happens to be the premiere of a kung fu movie that Kaifun and Minmay are starring in. I really love how they watch this kung fu movie and they think that the wushu magic that Kaifun pulls off in it is like a human ability that everyone can do. It makes them even more wary of the humans, and it's kind of funny. I also love how it just shows Bulldoza chilling in his lazy boy watching the movie. He looks like Grandpa watching an old western on TNT.
Head on, apply directly to the forehead. Head on, apply directly to the forehead. Head on, apply directly to the forehead.
Fucking commercials.
Available at Walgreens.
Not to mention the movie Xiao Pai Long has the best theme song ever made, sung by Minmay. I can't play it here because content ID, but let me tell you, Xiao Pai Long is a very messiah. Do yourself a favor and go look up the lyrics. Meanwhile, Misa and Hikaru are caught during a transformation and stranded in a section of the Macross. They make lovey eyes at each other, and then just as the sexual tension is just about too much, the transformation releases. Minmay holds a concert, and of course the ship comes under attack right in the middle of it. We do get to see this frame of Kaifun, and yup, that is the face of guy who wants to bang his cousin right there. A bunch of Zentradi have become overwhelmed with the temptation of culture and myclone themselves to escape during the battle. Hikaru is asked his opinion on letting the deserters, 29 myclone Zentradi in all, stay aboard the ship. Ultimately, it is decided that they should be allowed to stay as the Zentradi are born into a warrior culture. It isn't their choice, and it would be wrong to turn them away. Misa decides to go to Earth and speak with UNHQ as her father is an admiral there. She wants to ask them to reconsider negotiating with the aliens. Before she leaves, she tells Hikaru goodbye and then sees him once more as he flies escort for her shuttle. Max and Hikaru then go to the arcade to blow off some steam, and Max spies our old friend Emilia playing some sort of combat sim game. He plays against her and wins, asking her out on a date the next day. Milia agrees and runs away. The next day, Max does show up for his date with Milia, only for her to tell him that she's a Zentradi soldier and challenge him to a knife fight. Max wins the fight against her, and he wins so hard and is such a Chad that he turns Milia into a trad wife. He Catholic pills her. Next time she shows up, she's dressed in cottagecore and fucking baking. Such is the power of Max Chad. Also, when Max goes to ask Hikaru his advice on marrying Milia, Hikaru says, "Love is for idiots, it's useless." Guess Hikaru has been spending a little bit too much time on Reddit. The next time that Bertai's forces attack the Macross, there's a huge mutiny, and despite his orders to destroy the ship, Bertai decides to listen to his soldiers and orders a ceasefire. A single Zentradi vessel approaches the Macross, broadcasting a ceasefire signal. On board is Chief Archivist Exidal, who attends a meeting with Global and the other officers aboard the Macross. He wants Minmay and Kaifun to attend as well because of the Kung Fu movie his race still thinks is some sort of combat record, so he pantomimes Minmay's song and dance, and God, I love this show. By the end of the meeting, Laplamaz has betrayed Bertai and informed Boldolza that the Earth contains protoculture and there are soldiers among the fleet who are refusing to fight. This causes a full mobilization of the main Boldol fleet, and Bertai is like, "Laplamaz, you fucking dumbass, now they're gonna kill everybody?" So now the two forces that have been fighting for the entire series have a common enemy, and that enemy just happens to be a fleet of almost 5 million ships. Hikaru finally tells Minmay that he's always loved her as the Zentradi arrive. Minmay tells Hikaru that she does not have feelings for him. Misa is at UNHQ stationed at something known as the Grand Cannon. It is what it says on the label. Then the Zentradi bombard the planet Earth, effectively wiping out all but a handful of people. Yeah, the Earth is basically wiped out at this point in Macross. It's actually a pretty shocking twist. And this isn't Dragon Ball, you know, we can't just wish people back to life. Everyone on Earth is dead. The Macross comes up with the idea of having Minmay sing while broadcasting around all channels. Combined with the help of Bertai's forces, this is enough to push through and destroy the Bodil fleet's capital ship. Hikaru is knocked into the atmosphere during the final battle and is able to find Misa miraculously alive at the Alaska base. The two are finally reunited under the setting sun of the now ruined Earth, and we get a feeling of finality, like all the pieces are in their place. But this show has 8 more episodes, so that can't be right. Honestly, I wouldn't have minded if Macross ended here, but we get a whole epilogue arc set 2 years after the Earth's destruction. Captain Global is now commander-in-chief of basically the entire Earth. Misa and Hikaru are in a weird, flirty semi-relationship that seems like it should have progressed more in 2 years. And Minmay is traveling around the post-apocalyptic Earth with her abusive kissing cousin trying to recapture her love of music. Hikaru continues his duties as a pilot for the new UN government, which now uses the Macross as its main command base. We see our boy, 2 years later, flying around and still thinking about Minmay. Jesus, man, it's been 2 years. At a certain point, you gotta stop putting a pussy up on a pedestal, you know what I mean? Minmay herself is still hanging around with Kaifun, who has slid right into place as her manager. He's even more of an abusive dick now, and he's a heavy drinker. In fact, he's such an abusive piece of shit that Minmay attempts to jump from a moving car to get away from him. He still incessantly whines about the military overstepping their bounds, and at one point even petitions to have the military leave an incredibly important piece of machinery completely unguarded, just because he hates them. During the final arc, there are some Zentradi that are having a real difficult time adjusting to life on Earth. They were taught only to destroy for their entire lives, so having to rebuild the ruined Earth goes against their nature, which is another huge point that this show brings up in the final arc as well. Exidal tells Global that he believes that the Zentradi, who were created by the protoculture and then eventually rose up and destroyed them, and humans follow a parallel path. Humans have a history of infighting, so it's not a far cry to believe that one day they'll become just like the Zentradi, a cultureless warrior race that only knows battle. This actually inspires Global, whose main goal at the end of the series becomes to create a fleet of culture ships that can fly around and spread things like love and music throughout space. He does this by capturing a factory satellite early on in the final arc, a facility that can autonomously create warships for the new government. This goes hand in hand with Camjin and Lap Lamaz teaming up to cause trouble on the Earth. Camjin still has his ship, but it was damaged in the final battle with the Bodal fleet, so he spends this arc recruiting the restless Zentradi and raiding human settlements and factories for parts. That important piece of machinery that Kaifun was whining about that I mentioned earlier, that was a mycloning machine that Hikaru was attempting to take back to the Macross to prevent Camjin from granting disgruntled myclone Zentradi their giant forms. And of course, as soon as Kaifun wins his argument and Hikaru leaves, the city comes under attack and Camjin steals the machine, offering his forces a major boon. Of course, Kaifun doesn't care, because he's a huge asshole. This all comes to a head when Camjin finally steals an engine for his ship and launches an attack on the Macross, destroying the city and being shot down when the ship transforms for a final time and fires its main gun. Honestly, the action of this final arc is really simplified compared to the space battles of the rest of the series, and it makes the whole part of the show feel like an epilogue. The main focus of this arc isn't even the action anyway, the real focus is the relationship between Hikaru, Minmay, and Misa. I gotta come right out and say it, I find Hikaru and Minmay's back and forth relationship really annoying. Not in a way that makes me dislike the show though, in fact I think it does nothing but add to the drama. However, I am officially a Misa stan. I think she's cute, has more of a direct involvement in the plot, and her hair looks like cinnamon buns. So when Hikaru finally comes around and starts to get involved with her, it pisses me off when he just blows her off to go and hang out with Minmay. Like, dude, she literally told you that she does not have feelings for you, and it was your idea to take Misa out on a date, and now you're leaving her waiting alone to be sad at a cafe. Not to mention Hikaru tries to contact Misa to reschedule, but only tries calling her once and then just fucks off. You just sort of get the feeling that Hikaru doesn't give a shit about her, and I have to admit it does sour my opinion on him a little bit. The dude's kind of a jerk, and also a dumbass. Fortunately for me, Minmay realizes that she does actually love Hikaru, but only after 2 years of banging her cousin. Okay, it's never insinuated that Minmay and Kaifun do the deed, but she does directly say at one point that she has feelings for him, so ew? Also, last time I mentioned the cousin thing in a post, people posted that it was just cultural differences and marrying your cousin is normal in other parts of the world. If you want to call me a dumb Westerner or American, that's fine by me. Nobody is asking you to defend marrying your first cousin. And if you post a comment that is defending it, I will not read it. Her and Hikaru spend a few episodes together, and she desperately wants him not to be a soldier anymore, culminating in the attack on Macross City by Camjin's forces, where Hikaru finally goes with Misa, realizing that he and Minmay lead two very separate lives. Minmay then decides to travel to parts unknown so she can find her muse and sing again. Overall, the last arc really fixates on the relationships between these characters, and some things about it were hit or miss for me. While I do enjoy watching them all interact, the constant resetting of Hikaru's feelings for Misa do begin to drag a bit. Especially when they were starting to hit it off before the time skip, and then 2 years later their relationship has barely progressed at all. Also, while Kaifun does get a taste of karma and becomes a lonely alcoholic wandering the ruined earth by himself, I would have enjoyed him getting a bit more comeuppance. Nothing too crazy, maybe just like having a piano dropped on him, or like a big Zentradi using him as a toothpick, you know, nothing crazy. In the end, Global launches an initiative to send starships out into the cosmos to spread human culture across all the worlds that they can find. Misa is chosen as a captain of one of the new culture ships, and Hikaru continues his duties as a pilot and soldier, defending humanity from the unknown. And that was the story of Super Dimension Fortress Macross, more or less. If you got this far and haven't seen the show, well, here's a wholehearted recommendation from me. Since beginning this channel almost a year ago, I've come to find that some of the most unique and interesting ideas are present in anime from 20, 30, or even 40 years ago, and I put Macross up there with Gundam as far as influence and quality goes. The show has a cult following despite publisher fuckery, and has spawned not only its own multiple sequels, but also the entirety of the Robotech franchise as well. While Min-Mei grates on my nerves in ways that I can't quite describe, as the whole idol storyline doesn't really speak to me in the way that giant robot fights do, her presence helps connect the soldiers of the Macross with the civilians aboard. If anything, the music in the show is phenomenal, and Min-Mei's overall archetype would become influential, perhaps most obviously in the next video on this channel, Gundam Seed. Thank you for watching my video about my experience and thoughts on Macross. It really was a joy watching this series for the first time. If you enjoyed what you saw here, remember to subscribe, because every week I make a video talking about an old anime, or sometimes old video games too. Most importantly, I'm currently working on an all-encompassing Gundam retrospective, where I am chronicling my opinions and thoughts of the past 40 years of the Gundam franchise, good and bad. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon. Alright, well that one took a little while, didn't it? I feel like I worked on this Macross video for quite a long time, but I think it was worth it. It actually went through a rewrite, and I think the script for this one ended up being pretty good. I'm happy with it. It was the 10K special, so thank you guys all so much. I wanted to do Macross around the time I hit 10K subs, and we hit it like literally exactly as I was working on the video, so that worked out really well and was very good timing. So as for what's coming out next on the channel, I think the Gundam Seed video is also going to be quite long because I have a lot to say about it. So I would still probably expect that one in October, at some point before the end of the month. But I think after that, I'm either going to take a week off or work on a shorter video, because this month I put out a 45-minute video on Turn A, a 30-minute video on G-Savior, and then this 40-minute video on Macross, and I'm not done. We still have a Gundam Seed video to come out, which I know will be like 30 to 40, so there's that. And plus, also, if anyone was wondering, I will be giving my thoughts on the first 4 episodes of Witch from Mercury. Those are going to be split into every 4 episodes. I'm going to like just talk about it with like a little spoiler discussion, unedited type off-the-cuff video. So that will be up at some point next week, probably Monday or Tuesday. I have friends coming up to visit, so might be a little bit late, but I don't know. Anyway, thank you guys so fucking much for hanging out and checking out the channel and being one of the 10K subs. Important stuff coming up. We will be opening up a Discord at some point between now and 15,000. That was my goal. And then also, I finally resigned to probably do a Patreon. I've had a lot of people ask about it, and I've said before, I didn't know how to approach it, but I've been putting a lot of thought into it, so I would keep an eye out on that, like before we hit 20K, maybe. I don't want people to feel like they have to pay anything to view my content, especially as a small content creator. I am a little bit wary of making people feel like that, so we're gonna play it by ear still, but I've been giving it a lot of thought. Anyway, thank you guys again. We'll see you next week with a couple of videos, and yeah, you're all awesome.